Usually they say, please identify yourself, and you acknowledge that you permit this to be broadcast. And
Okay, you've done this more than I have, so if you'd like to start it off, you can go ahead and do that.
No, that's okay.
Here we are. It's February 1st, 2012. We're at Westport Town Hall with Gordon Joseloff, the first selectman of Westport. You recognize that we're recording this and authorize it for broadcast, is that correct?
Very good, Mark. You're good. That's good. That's right.
I learned.
Yes, I do.
I learned quickly. Well, welcome, Gordon. Glad to have you here. Of course, we're doing this for Westport Stories, and very glad to have you as part of the initiative that we're putting together. Wanted to start off with a couple of things for you. How did you come to be in Westport?
How did I come to be in Westport? Well, I was brought to Westport at the age of 3 months by my parents. So they bought a house on Campo Road South, now known as Mansfield Place, and lived there for a number of years through my, I guess, 8 or 9 years old. Then we moved to a house on North Avenue, North Side Lane, as a matter of fact. And I had a great upbringing. I went through the Westport school system through the 6th grade, and my parents divorced, and I moved to New York with my mother. Went to school in New York City and spent summers in Westport with my father. And all my friends were in Westport, so I feel as if I'm an honorary Staples High School graduate, class of 1963. Those were all my friends. So it was a great time growing up. The 1950s. It was obviously a much smaller town. It was a town of approximately 11,000, and it was a town of mostly artists, writers, a lot of advertising folks. My father was in the advertising marketing business, and it was a town that was bursting at the seams. And it was a town that built Coleytown Elementary School in 1953, and I was a 3rd grader in the 1st class there. I'm in Town Hall, which used to be Bedford Elementary School, which is where I went to 2nd grade. And I began 1st grade in Saugatuck Elementary School, which is now the Saugatuck Senior Housing Facility on Bridge Street. And I do remember Mrs. Tout and Mrs. King as kindergarten, I think 1st grade teachers there. And somewhere I have a picture of me with, I think, the kindergarten and 1st grade class visiting Nyla Farm many years ago. So I go back a few years and watch the town change over the years, and change is okay, but it certainly is a different town. It was a town when I was growing up that you knew virtually everybody in town, or you thought you did. And as a youngster, I'd ride my bike downtown. We'd park in front of the Y, and Saturday mornings we'd go into the Y, and we'd watch Hopalong Cassidy or Flash Gordon serials. There was a billiard table. I'm not sure we were allowed to use it, but it was fun. And then the routine was we go to Colgan's Pharmacy, which is now the Tiffany store on the corner. And I think the meal was usually a hamburger and a cherry Coke. 2 o'clock matinee at the Fine Arts Theater for kids, cartoons preceding, Old Yeller or whatever, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, 25 cents admission. I didn't have to pay because my grandfather built that theater and the family owned the theater, so I was kind of pleased with that, and I'd also bring in a lot of my friends, so they certainly enjoyed that. But it was a fun time. It was a time that post-World War II, and a lot of families were moving into the suburbs. And it was a town, as I said, where everybody knew everybody. And heaven forbid if you should do something untoward downtown or misbehave, the tom-toms would ring loud and clear or sound loud and clear before you got home. Word would get back that, something. I was a good boy, of course, so I never did anything, but others would be, a shopkeeper, and you go in stores and, so-and-so, put it on the charge, and your parents would get a bill at the end of the month, or somebody would, tell you and fix you up, or fix your sweater, or sew a button on your shirt, and it was just a pleasant place growing up. Those are the good memories. I was in Little League, so played ball. My twin brother played ball in Little League, and we were on different teams. And I do remember my mother, she was undecided as to, she couldn't root for either one. And it was at the golf field, which was on Imperial Avenue, no longer exists. And I remember she decided she would sell hot dogs that day, as her boys played against each other. So that was very diplomatic of my mother to do that. But it was a fun time. It was as I said, mid-50s to late 50s, and You know, every kid, I think, had lots of friends. I remember my friends were sons of plumbers and police officers, and they were black and white, and everybody got along. And I happened to live in a house, you know, that had lots of rooms, my second house in Westport. But I remember a good friend of mine lived in, you know, almost a chicken coop kind of home. I didn't care, he didn't care. He'd come to my house and I'd go to his house. And that's the way it was. It was a very fun time growing up, and I have great memories, of course. And later in my career, actually, I went off to Tokyo among my postings for CBS News. And I got a letter from my fourth grade teacher at Kolyatown Elementary School saying, of course, he remembered me, he'd seen me on television, and still had the tie that my brother and I had given him for his birthday back in fourth grade. So long memories and good memories of Westport.
Good. You said you spent the summers here as you were growing up? What are
summers after my parents' divorce, so that was...
And what were those summers like back then? What years were those, and what were some of the things you did during the summer?
I went to Camp Mahakano, learned how to swim. I got my flying fish badge, and that was a lot of fun. Then went to day camp in Weston called Singing Oaks Day Camp, which is now a housing development. Then went off to a camp in Massachusetts, overnight camp, sleepaway camp, because I was a big guy then, and we could do that. But it was a fun time. And in 1961, I got a job as a cub reporter on the Westport Town Crier. So that's how I began my paid journalism career. I think I got all of $60 a week. And I covered Westport Town government. I covered the Westport RTM. And that's where I got my first taste of town government, and some of the players, and I remember some of the players, who were on the RTM, how many years ago now? 50, 60 years ago. 50 years ago, I think. And it sort of, I guess, whet my appetite to come back and get involved in town government. But when I was a teenager covering Westport, we also started a teenage radio station. I had a friend who attended Staples High School, and he started the radio station actually in his bedroom. And a very small transmitter. You could buy these Heath kits as a kid and build your own radio transmitter, and they were supposed to go from here to there, 10 feet or 20 feet. Well, of course, kids being kids, they juiced it up a little bit, and pretty soon it was being heard for several miles, and decided that we were going to start a radio station. So we asked the YMCA if we could use one of their rooms, and they gave us a room. And we put a studio in the YMCA, and then we contracted with a telephone company to run an audio line to Campo Beach, where we put the transmitter. So it was a station called WWPT, and we broadcast that summer. I think it was 1961. We took ads, and I was the news director, and it was a fun time. And as a matter of fact, we got some publicity in the New York Times one day. And it was not too long after that, maybe several hours, that somebody from the FCC came knocking on our door and saying, you're exceeding the broadcast limit of these home transmitters, and instead of 10 feet, we were broadcasting 10 miles and could be heard in Long Island or someplace. And they said, boys, it's time for you to shut down. So we did. But it was a good experience, and I still am good friends with some of the people who broadcast then. Of course, that was the precursor to the Staples radio station, WWPT.
And let's leap forward a couple of years. That's not your only media venture here in Westport. Can you tell us a little bit about Westport Now, and what prompted you to start that?
That was
how
many
you did
years
that?
later. As a foreign correspondent, I lived in London, Moscow, and Tokyo. Spent 8 years in Tokyo, 6 years in Moscow over 2 tours for United Press International, CBS News, London. And my territory in Asia was everything from Hawaii to India, Pakistan, Australia, Korea, Philippines, Thailand. You name it, that was my territory, and I spent a lot of time traveling. But obviously I have a great interest in journalism, and I started Westport Now because, much like you, I think, and Westport Stories, I wanted to create a digital record of Westport in the late 20th century, or 21st century, I guess, and began Westport Now in 2003. And so here we are, about to mark our 9th anniversary of Westport Now, and it really is it's something from the heart. It really reflects, I think, what Westport is, and I think it's been successful, at least as far as readership. Financially, it's still in the red. But fortunately, I'm in a position to keep it going. We are getting more ads. But really, my motivation was I would love to have seen 100 years ago a complete digital history, or more complete history. What was life like in Westport 100 years ago? I do have, and I'm somewhat of a Westport history buff, and I have a bound collection of the Westport Advertiser from its first issue, I think, in 1873, and a lot of Westport artifacts. And you read this, Mrs. Jones visited Mrs. Murphy today, and that was the news of the day. So really, I hope, and I've urged the library to try to, in some manner, preserve the digital history of that Westport Now, because it would be a shame to have 9 or 10 years of real clear photographs and video included disappear later on. And we've seen that, I think, with gifts to Staples High School. I think it was one of the local filmmakers gave a gift of interviewing local artists, preserving their history. And I suggested that not only give the videotape, or I think it was a DVD, but give them a DVD player that they would keep, for 100 years or so. So 100 years from now, it's like us looking for an 8-track player, that they would actually have the player to play the medium on which it was recorded. So I'm very sensitive to the fact that preserving history, and that's what you're doing now. So I can talk about it, but wouldn't it be great to see, we can go back in the 1950s and growing up and look at home movies, and several people have done that, but now we have such a vast collection, and of course 100 years from now or less, people are going to go back and say, did Mark Mathias, did he preserve his digital recordings, and what about with his family and life around Westport? And so I think that we really should be motivated to ask people not just to do the Westport stories, but contribute DVDs of Westport life in Westport. So those who come much later will say, here are the people who are telling their stories, but here's what life was like. Here's what it looked like at Campo Beach, or a traffic jam on 95, or a busy day, at soccer or whatever. So that, I think, would be a real boon.
Good. What are some of the things about Westport that you have enjoyed over the years, maybe as a young child, the summers here? Are there anything that either been consistent that you've enjoyed over the years, or is there something that as a child you really enjoyed, but that's no longer here, but then now as an adult there are other things that you enjoy that kind of take its place?
Obviously the physical factors, the beauty of Westport and its place on Long Island Sound, Campo Beach, and that. It's nice to know that the Campo Beach that people saw years ago hasn't changed all that much. And I have a postcard collection. You can see different bathing suits and some different swimming platforms, but essentially it's the same. And so, I think it's somewhat comforting to me to know that Campo Beach hopefully will remain much the same, perhaps 100 years from now or 50 years from now. And people will dress differently, and there'll be different mediums in which to convey messages, but hopefully the sound will exist. But over the years, Westport has been a very eclectic community. It's been has a history, traces it back to an artist colony in the 20s and 30s. And some of the characters, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Babe Ruth visited and played golf. So over the years, the people who traveled to Westport who lived here, Elizabeth Taylor lived here with her first baby. Marilyn Monroe lived in Weston, for a while. From the Paul Newmans to the history of all the stars, and it was a great, and has been and continues to be a great gathering place for artists, writers, and media folk who at times can be a bit quirky. And I've noticed that as first selectman. I say if I could put together all the strange people with great intelligence that come to me with the most bizarre requests and complaints, we'd be even a better town than we are today. But it's just the talent that exists in this. You're an example that exists in this community is amazing. Any other community in this country, I think, would just be delighted to have 1/10 of the population, and people are always coming up with new ideas and inventing things. I went to a thing the other night, was a meetup with people interested in digital media and social media and Facebook and Twitter and Google Plus, and very interested and very motivated. And this is in Westport, and that's one of the things I'd like to harness is their talent Silicon Valley can be on the West Coast, but maybe we can put together something in Westport that might harness and promote the creativity of all these people.
Are there some events that have occurred in your time in Westport that you find particularly memorable? Either, a special 4th of July on the beach, a natural disaster, something with one of your children that might is particularly memorable.
Well, I've been.
And we could probably talk for hours about that.
I've been an EMT. Just recently relinquished my license for 20 years. I've been a volunteer firefighter for 20 years. So I've seen what I call the underside of Westport. So I've seen a lot of tragedy, a lot of heartbreak. As a journalist, I've seen it, but I call the firefighting part of my life and the EMT part of my life instant gratification. As first selectmen and as politicians and as lawmakers and volunteers in government, we often sit around for too many hours debating something. Should we do this? Should we do that? And whatever. And I call firefighting and the EMT work instant gratification. You save a life or you don't, and you put out a fire or you don't. I remember, I think it was 3 weeks after I became an EMT that I had a call in an area of Westport. It was a 16-year-old youth who was with some friends, and they're playing Russian roulette with a live bullet. He put a bullet into his head and he died in my arms and the ambulance going to the hospital. I've seen tragedies, unspeakable trauma, but I've seen also happiness. I've seen babies born or babies after they were just born. And it's a great reward for me, and I think for all the others who work in these emergency services. We're there to help people. And I've gone to accidents where somebody's been injured or a driver and they see me, and I've had people come up and hug me. Oh, Gordon, it's good to see a friendly face, and I feel much more relaxed, or thank goodness you're here. So that's kind of rewarding. But we've had, I remember the '92 storm. Saugatuck Shores and Campo Beach flooded, much worse than the recent Hurricane Irene kind of thing. And that was serious stuff. And of course we had the tragedy recently in December of the murder of Cutie Zeeby, a jeweler in Westport. Unfortunately, the man was found, and so that was resolved. But Westport is not immune because it sits by 95 and it sits the Merritt Parkway and the Boston Post Road. We are very attractive. Thieves and crime goes where the money is, and there's a lot of money in Westport. And so that's been sort of the downside. But fortunately, we have an excellent police department, as demonstrated with the detective work in the recent murder, and an excellent fire department. And one of my goals is to make sure that they are as best equipped as they can be, because I fight for them. I go out in the middle of the night and go to fires and other things to be not only working. They let me, I think, roll up hose now. That's about the extent of my activity. But to be supportive and make sure that they have the equipment and training that they need. And it's tough in these economic times because you have to make some very difficult choices. And I think the people of Westport, thank goodness, have been very supportive, and they recognize that we are our best supporters and that we can't rely on the National Guard to come riding in to rescue us, particularly when it's a disaster that impacts all those around us. That we are on our own, and we'll be on our own for probably a good while until whatever the emergency is resolved. So that's why we need to be as prepared as we can be.
What are some of the major changes you've seen over the 20, 30, 40, 50 years here in Westport in terms of anything that just kind of a...
Well, certainly you've seen the loss of the mom and pops on Main Street. A lot of the stores now are chain-owned, national brands. It's a rare retailer on Main Street. I think Acorn's Pharmacy, Harvey's Liquor is now moving to another location, but their Westport Pizzeria, you can count them on one hand. But it used to be, when I was growing up, we had Greenberg's department store, we had a couple of hardware stores, pharmacies, and bakeries, butchers, and it was a much more laid-back kind of town. So you've seen the houses have gone from 2,000 square feet to 12,000 square feet, and I think fortunately, so the trend now is back to smaller houses. But the pace of life has changed, and the police chief gave a speech the other day at the Rotary, And he said, incivility breeds incivility. And he's right. And he said a lot of their complaints that they deal with are people complaining about people running red lights, talking on cell phones, near accidents or accidents caused by people not being attentive, somebody pulling out in front of somebody else, road rage, and it's just a whole list of complaints where when I was growing up here and people were a lot more laid back. They were driven, many type A personalities, but somehow they had time for each other, and time didn't seem to be so precious. But today, it's a different lifestyle. So I'm glad to see we're trying to reverse that. We've started a farmers market under my administration, and we've done some other things, celebrate Westport initiatives. We have the barbecue festival. We have the Levitt, which has programs not only in the summer, but other programs that occur at the Levitt year-round. The Westport Country Playhouse is year-round. The Arts Center has come into its own with major programs. So you're seeing a changing Westport, but also a Westport that pays homage to its ancestors, if you will, to those who've gone before. You see a man like Howard Muntz. I think Howard just celebrated his 95th birthday. So he's a bridge, and he's in great shape. But he remembers and was a member of the artist colony of many years ago. And so we're able to learn from his experiences and to grow his experiences. And it's just a great town to grow up in. And being an hour from New York City, the trains are a little bit crowded, and railroad parking is a little bit difficult to get unless you've been here for a number of years, but it's still a great place to live. Excellent school system. The kids who go out of, as a member of the Board of Ed, who go out from Staples High School make their mark on the world. Pulitzer Prize winners, orchestra leaders, singers, actors, sports people. It's just amazing. And they all come out of this town. And I think it's more than something in the water.
Just as we kind of wrap this up, any comments that you have about Westport that you think should be archived for posterity here?
Ooh, archived for posterity. It's a good life. It's a good life. It's a good town, and it's only going to get better. There are going to be those who will come years after this and will look kind of quaint and funny, and they'll think, iPhones and iPads. What are those? They had those back in the early 21st century. But hopefully the town won't change, and the people who populate the town will still be creative and appreciative of what they have, and hopefully will also be cognizant of leaving their memories for somebody 100 years after them or later.
Well, Gordon, thank you very much. I've appreciated your time in the interview, and we will let you know as it becomes published and available.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Should we do take two?